Hey guys, welcome to the Unleash podcast brought to you by Hidden Gen, where we talk about how to unleash your hidden potential. I'm your host here, the audience, and we have a great episode for you today featuring Dan Newmire. Dan, thank you very much for being on today.
No problem. Pleasure being here.
Excellent, my friend. Before we jump into today's topics, we would like to invite you to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. You can always find this podcast at Hidden Gen website, hiddengen.net. And if you live in the area and you have not been at Hidden Gen, you can visit hiddengen.net and grab a free trial pass. All right, Dan. So before we start, I would like you to give an overview, about your background, your academic background, of course, but also your athletic career as a bodybuilder.
Dr. Dan Newmire, from originally born and raised in Iowa. I did my undergrad degree at University of Iowa. Exercise. Was it? Exercise. Was it? I can't remember my undergrad degree. That's health sports with a minor in exercise science, I believe, something like that. And anyways, went on to moved out of Iowa, went to Arizona for a little bit, and anyways went to Georgia for a while. Worked on my master's degree. Originally went back to school to become a chiropractor, and then changed my mind from a chiropractor to a medical doctor to a DO, DPT, and then finally had some mentors and individuals talk me into go work on my PhD and become poor and go that route. So, anyways, went to Texas, and where I met all of you when I was working on my doc degree at TWU, and since then got out of doc school jail, went to Nebraska for a short stint, and now I'm down South Texas at TAMU Corpus Christi. So that's the academic background. As far as competing, after high school, I played football, loved football. And those that know me, I'm a huge Ohio State fan, but obviously I was too short, too slow, not really athletic enough to play football. So I had to find another competitive outlet for myself. And I loved competing. I love that physical exercise. I've always loved those things. I just didn't have the athletic ability or the talent to get into play areas I wanted to. Anyways, got into bodybuilding, started training, and then I think I woke up from a very, very, very bad Jack Daniels hangover and said, that was it. I'm done. I'm done with this lifestyle. And I started getting more involved and reading into bodybuilding, and I really wanted to take initiative and started training. Met some of my original great friends and mentors in Iowa that helped direct me, and I competed, and they felt that I could potentially do well if I decided to start competing. So I did my first show when I was 20 years old. I think I won my class light heavyweight at the NPC Iowa, and the following year I came back and won it in the overall as a heavyweight. And from there, I just kind of got bit by the virus. And so, but there's not a whole lot of places you can go in Iowa. It's kind of limited. I did collegiate nationals one year, got third in the heavyweight class that year, and then I did the Iowa again, won it again, and then decided it was time for me to leave. So I went to Arizona. I didn't compete out there. It was too poor, working very low-level jobs, personal trainer, personal training manager, different stuff out there that just couldn't afford it. And then went to Georgia, competed again, and then I won the Georgia State show there. Did an Alabama show there, won that overall there, and during that time a couple different shows. I think I actually did nationals a couple times. Just the first time doing nationals, it was an eye opener. It was like, I am not
Were
ready
you
for this.
heavyweight at that time? Oh, you always over
Yes.
heavyweight, right?
No. I've always been, for the majority of my career, I've been super heavyweight. I was competed, but I was at the heavyweight at that time. And then actually, no, I take that back. I was actually starting to leak over into super heavyweight. I take that back. So I think I leaked, but I would never classify myself as a true super heavyweight because I just didn't have the height. I was not that tall, and so
Well,
I
what
had
was your
weight.
weight on competition like?
Depends. Some years I came in around 240. I think at Junior USA's in 2012, I came in at I don't know 250 something, and that was probably when I probably maxed like the size that I could probably put on my frame because I would refuse to get I try to be 300 pounds, and that off season we just felt like absolute poop. and I didn't feel good. And so 270 is always where my body weight just hung around in an off season kind of training. It just stuck. No matter what I ate, what I did, I always consider myself a fat kid no matter what, but it just sticks. And so I usually would diet down from there.
Well, you always said that.
Relax.
You always joke about the fat kids. So I was always curious to ask this question. Growing up, were you really fat?
I guess everything's a reference point. So as far as fat kids compared to other people, I guess so. I mean, but I guess how you define a fat kid? That's like, everything's based on a definition, right? So, I had friends that joke with me in high school football saying I was the only lineman with a six pack. But, again, then you start talking about, the body dysmorphic disorder, which I think is a prereq for bodybuilding. And I'm sure at some level we all have that diagnosis. So I couldn't tell you. So, again, was I morbidly obese? I have a very thick family, short and stocky, German-based family, so that likes to eat food. So we are not a thin family by any means. So that's I come from that background.
But when you were
anyways,
here in Texas, I think that I would think that you were in your best shape in your competitive career. At least when you did the Texas state, you were really looking really good at that time.
Yeah, that was probably I was doing really well. I felt I was getting really close. I think it was my best, because I ended up doing North Americans and got my best overall placing at that show that year. And again, it was good. I was getting to the point. Like I said, I was still not big enough to where I thought. And I actually did the North Americans one last time in 2018 just to see. I tried to come in a little bit smaller to see if that, and it was actually terrible idea because every guy was like 270, 280, 6 foot something. I just got dwarfed, and it was just not going to happen.
It was your last show, that one?
Yeah, that was the last time I competed. I did a show down here in Corpus Christi, the Battle of the Bay, won that, and then just decided to North Americans and see if I could just sneak by. It's like, please, I've donated enough to this company and organization. Can you please just give me one of those pro cards so I can finally go off the sunset? But I think I got another bridesmaid in the Masters. So I got another bridesmaid again. I got two bridesmaids the last time. It was just at that time. That's when I was like, well, all the money we had spent to go up to Pittsburgh and travel and all these things. It's like this is like a mortgage payment.
Yeah,
it's like, this is like what are you really? And quite frankly, everyone has different opinions about bodybuilding, and I love it.
You still look for your size. It looks like you're still training.
Oh yeah, I'm not. That doesn't go away. I mean, I'm hurting. I'm not as strong as anymore. My weight has, it's been pretty steady. But I would say I'm a little bit fluffier than probably when I was up there. But I'm not moving the amount of weight because I hurt. I've had some injuries since that time because age.
Yep.
It doesn't forgive anyone when they get by. Yeah. So things break down pretty quickly, whether you like it or not.
But you still training like at least 5 times a week right now?
5 to 6 days a week I train because I still have that. That's my mentality that I have to have that outlet. So,
and I'm assuming that you go to the university, so you train like in the morning or late at night?
No, I can't do the university because then students are there, and then it just becomes a interruption. So I'm very selfish about that time. I always have been. I've never been really social. I used to be kind of a little bit social at Destination and that old gym. I think it's I can't think of the name now. It's where Justin's at, that old gym on Preston Road.
Yeah, Extreme Iron.
Yeah, I used to get a little too social there sometimes, and then you'd be there for 4 hours. Like, no, I can't do this anymore. But I'm it's headphones in, it's the ugly face, don't bother me, time to go. It's time to go to work. And there's a Gold's Gym down here that was similar to that one. If you remember the old Golds that closed, the corporate Golds on Preston that closed after the storm hit. Yeah, kind of like that, but at a lesser level. But they just closed it down here, unfortunately. We do not have riches of gyms down here. That's the.
But they have enough dumbbells, big dumbbells for you, right?
We have an old school gym called Lynn's. I went back to, and it's literally stuck in 1980.
Wow.
It's literally stuck in 1980. Yeah, it's got some cool equipment you'll never find anywhere else. But just has that old school mentality. So it gets by. It does get. They don't have very heavy dumbbells, but Again, those days are.
That,
I'd be careful. I'd be careful because you have to pick and choose those battles.
yes, absolutely. Well, recently you share a study that actually led to the invitation for this podcast. And I
Hmm.
was reading this. I mean, I read your post, then I started reading this study, and basically it concluded that there is strong evidence that to date, right? I mean, based on nowadays reality, that resistance training is associated with the reduced risk of all-cause mortality, including cardiovascular disease and cancer. Now, let's
Hmm.
first clarify within this context what resistance training means.
So that's the term has kind of turned. And again, I'll speak from my perspective because I can't answer this for everyone all the time in academia. The term that used to be used quite often in research and academia is strength training. Strength
Yeah, I
training.
always heard
Right?
that. Yeah.
So yeah, and that's kind of the old school format. And it's still actually used by a lot of the veterans today. But the strength training is only one real outcome measure. It's a fundamental outcome measure, but not the only outcome measure of resistance training. So resistance training is some kind of activity, that I would define as being scheduled with a goal of some kind of resistance against a joint, of some kind of joint action. So typically, weightlifting would be a fundamental. So resistance training, I would conclude as like the umbrella term.
Hmm.
So all things under that would be strength training, weightlifting, Olympic lifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding. All these different styles would go underneath the umbrella term.
Okay, so this does not include any type of cardio at all.
Now, the paper you're referring to, they had some different definitions because it's hard to tease out in research just resistance training by itself. There's a lot of data out there with different things. This paper had one where it had like some other variables as far as physical activity, and they labeled that in there, and they teased it out. But the number of papers on this, and there's always these caveats, and that's what, again, people always walk into these studies, and either they form a very, very strong conviction, either way, against or for, right? And sometimes you have to step back and go, okay, there's pros with this and there's cons with this, but what's the overall story and how does it benefit the plethora of literature already out there? And so I think sometimes you got to step back and look at that. What appeals to me from this, from my bias, is resistance training is now within, let's just say the last 10, 15, 20 years is finally getting a spotlight. My area, as far as exercise physiology, and there's nothing wrong with this, has been dominated by aerobic
Yep,
exercise.
yep.
So, and there's nothing, and again, not questioning it. These are healthy things, but there's more and more literature, more and more research, more and more aspects that are now starting to conclude that resistance training is just as important for adaptations and or for health outcomes as aerobic exercise is. And I can give you background. In my career of teaching, I've had to actually take a lot of my books that I've selected for my courses and actually have to just fill back in with a lot of resistance training information and data because it's completely aerobically biased.
Yeah.
And because it's written by people and people that were aerobic area. And again, not poo-pooing on that. Aerobic exercise is shown to have beautiful effects and it should be promoted regardless, but they keep ignoring the resistance training elephant in the room.
So
So
you
to
are
speak.
one does not eliminate the other. Basically, this is what you're saying.
Yes, and they both have benefits, and there is some kind of crossover. There's a little bit of crossover, but the benefits are more specific. So when I say specific, it's that cardio. If we want to just talk about cardiovascular adaptations in health, then we really need to talk about aerobic exercise. That's what we really need to talk about because that modality of exercise, what I would conclude as the king or queen of cardiovascular health, of maintaining, promoting cardiovascular health. But if we're going to start talking about skeletal muscle health, preservation, maintenance, gain, then we need to start talking about resistance training as the fundamental stimulus for that. While cardiovascular exercise really has minimal effect on
Yeah,
that
but
as
it's funny
far
that
as
this study actually mentioned cardiovascular, right? It
yep,
says that
mm-hmm,
resistance training
yep,
reduce risk of
yep.
cardiovascular disease.
Yes, and then, again, if you look at some of the percentages, but again, be careful with this. So again, a lot of it does. There is I think, a small percentage. If I look back at it, the CVT mortality. I have to look back at the actual numbers. It looked about like 15%. But then when you actually add that in with other components, that NVPA, I have to look back at the term they use. This physical activity level, those percentages increase more so, which that could consist of more aerobic exercise components or aerobic activity. So what I'm saying is, if it can reduce the risk of cardiovascular all-cause mortality. It can. There is definitely resistance because it is exercise. Mm-hmm. But if we start talking about cardiovascular disease by itself, and we really are focusing on cardiovascular health, I would be prescribing aerobic exercise along with as a fundamental.
Yes. So, if you think about percentage, for example, would you say, well, you should be doing 30% aerobic and 70% resistance? There is that percentage at all, or not really?
These are completely relative to the situation, the person, people, goals, and all these other different outcomes. So it's hard to say you should do this percentage daily and you should do this percentage daily. Now, currently, the generic recommendations are 3 to 5 days of 30 or 50 to 150 minutes of some kind of moderate aerobic exercise per week, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then the 1 to 2, actually 2 days of some kind of strength training activity. That's the minimal recommendations currently. So if you look at that and start in percentages, it seems like there's a greater percentage on aerobic than there is resistance training based on that. Yep. But also understanding that some of the adaptations that take place and how they, the time course of adaptations they're different. Mm-hmm. And some of the outcomes are different. So meaning that this is highly dependent. It's hard to answer these questions with this absolute black and white, do this all the time, right? Because you can't do that. It's conditional. So if an individual, let's just give examples. So if an individual is trying to lose, let's just say non-bodybuilder, non-athlete, general population person is trying to lose weight, what would you recommend, right? So obviously there would be diet modifications. Okay, we got that. That's a known, right? Mm-hmm. And then there would be some kind of prescription of aerobic exercise for the sake of energy expenditure, right? To increase energy expenditure. And then the aspect of resistance training is not going to create that much of a detriment to energy expenditure. Right? We can talk about that later on. But what resistance training does do is preserve muscle mass. It preserves. So if someone just does aerobic exercise and diets, they could actually lose skeletal muscle mass if they do not have some kind of resistance training aspect with that. Yeah. So again, all sounds generic, right? And again, we've all heard this before, but there's a reason, there's a basis for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think that this awareness, and because at the beginning you just said that resistance training is getting more momentum, do you think that this was because of the pandemic, the last 2 years with the pandemic, where people were relying on buying weights and training at home, and there were so many things going on during that time that people basically were funded on exercise to get better?
Yeah, again, I think so. But again, we have to be careful how we look at it. So let's say that there's some kind of numbers showing that people are exercising at home and buying stuff. But the data continually shows that as Americans, we don't exercise very much at all overall. And, the BMI continually goes up, and these cardiovascular disease, obesity, all these values are going up. So,
but the question is, do you think it got better? Because, okay, it's still poor, but at least in the last 2 years brought more awareness and made people to change. I think that's the question.
Without trying to sound pessimistic, I hope so. I don't know, so I guess that all comes out if there's a change in some of these numbers that have been acquired by the government over time. But again, it's hard to make these assumptions based on the pandemic.
You never read any study on that, basically.
On COVID, you mean, how COVID's affected our the appreciation or the change? So I guess I'm misunderstanding your question. What I'm thinking is what you're asking is, have I read a study that has the effect of COVID on people's perspective of resistance training? Is that what you're kind of asking? Yeah. So I don't know if there's anything that has been done, but that obviously becomes a subjective measure. But I don't know. I don't know if that's really changed. Again, it's hard because we're all locked in our little worlds. We see what we see, but that doesn't always translate to the rest of the world
Hmm.
or even the rest of the country, maybe the rest of the state. So what we do look at is numbers as far as statistics, as far as BMI, mortality rate, cardiovascular disease, and those things continue to elevate. So could you make the suggestion that the pandemic maybe what rose awareness for a short period of time? I don't know. So I can't really comment and say yes or no either way with that because I've not seen any data to show that. I would hope so. I would hope so. I think a lot of people that are currently training gained a whole new appreciation when we were physically removed from our areas, and I think that happened. But
Yeah.
it's hard to know if it actually translated to more Americans becoming more involved. I don't know, but I will say this: is that there is more work, being done with resistance training getting a spotlight,
Hmm.
and not just as a performance thing, not as a bigger, stronger, faster kind of aspect.
Yeah.
It's actually translating as a clinical health, mental health tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And hopefully one day will be as mainstream as aerobic, where it becomes like CDC guidelines for the entire population.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there are again, strength training is a basic fundamental, and and I always hope this is all you're complaining, but right now you don't have to have a license or certification to promote or perform training oversight, right? And so it's not, exercise is not viewed as a medicine. So
In
I can
US,
sit
by
here,
the way, in
yeah,
US, right? Because
yeah. So
I'm from Brazil, and one of the reasons back in the day I wanted to do a university for physical education. They actually have a degree in physical education there. So for you to
mhm,
be a personal trainer, you should have a bachelor's degree in physical education.
mhm,
So that's how it works there. And when I
mhm,
moved to US, I was actually surprised that we don't have such a thing here. You could just get a certification and
mhm.
go with it, right? Not a true bachelor's degree.
Sure, and it's not licensed. People can do this because it's not. Now, if it ever gets to that point where it becomes licensed and people then looked at like a dietitian or a coach or some kind of athletic trainer, then it gets the respect level that maybe might initiate where it's more important. But that, as you know, takes
Takes
lots
time.
of different
Yeah,
money, a lot of different opinions, a lot of different stuff in order
yeah.
for those things to happen. But again, it's a dream. But you are right. And I think there's a new era of resistance training coming. Again, the book I used to teach my undergrad class with now actually has its own chapter on resistance training that was never there before. So
Nice.
this should show you that where there's a drive, there will be adaptation to the consumer, so to speak. So this wasn't there before, and a lot of them don't have that, and now there is. So it's starting to actually break the mold, and as you are aware. And I think once academia starts doing that, and there's a lot of academics that are standing on top of the hill with a torch, screaming out loud, like myself, that this is not just about cosmetic meathead stuff.
Hmm.
This is actually goes well beyond that.
Yeah, and now I'm not sure if this study, the parameters were actually explicitly revealed, because I was trying to understand, was this any specific age group when they did the research? It was male and female. Do you know how it was?
So this was just, I think, they basically, this is a meta-analysis. So this meta-analysis is basically they selected different papers in the past that have looked upon this. So and I didn't go back to see what the demographics on these other populations, and they actually only chose 4 studies. So after their filtration methods and all their stuff, they only had 4 studies, and even the authors say, please be careful and be cautious about our outcomes that we found, which they should. They're being responsible, which goes to show you that based on their inclusionary factor as far as their analysis is that there's just not very many studies. So it's really hard to make a conclusive aha moment based on 4 studies alone. But that also means that there's just not a whole lot of work. And resistance training or any kind of exercise training study, they're a lot of work, and they take a lot of money and they take a lot of time. And if you can only get 20 some people to orchestrate or to observe, investigate, think about how many studies you'd have to have for a large N population to see. So this gets time consuming. But as far as demographics, I couldn't tell you what exactly going back on that. You have to go to each of those separate papers that they analyze.
And they also don't review as far as the training duration, right? When you say resistance training, are they talking about a baseline of what, 1 hour exercise?
So they do it. They're looking at relative risk. So basically, they do have a nice little interesting thing. And again, this is where you got to kind of step back and kind of look at relativity here, conditionally. So there is this. They had this, which is called a U-shaped curve. I don't know if you had that. It's figure 3 in that paper that we were talking about. And I think I posted. It basically shows at roughly 60-ish minutes of resistance training that there seems to be a decrease in all-cause mortality. So basically what it says, if you want to extrapolate the meaning from that, if you train 60 minutes a day, you're going to reduce the risk of you dying.
Yeah.
Okay? However, there's one part of it. The other caveat, it says time increases beyond 2 hours, you're going to increase your risk of dying. What?
Yeah.
What? So what? Wait a minute. So if I train 2 hours, I'm going to die. If I train 60 minutes, I'm good. So do you see how you got to be careful how you interpret these findings? So this is a meta-analysis, epidemiological aspect, information, and also on top of that, another one of the big things. This is self-reported data. So self-reported. These are people reporting back through paper or some kind of information. So that has bias. So you have to be very, very careful. That's like taking a survey. If you survey, 100 people at the gym or different gyms across Dallas, right? They're reporting something, but how do you know that's necessarily true, and how do you verify that and validate that? So there's some bias aspect with that. So again, this paper has a lot of limitations, but what's beautiful about it is that it highlights that resistance training has a positive effect on reducing some of these things that are causing us as humans to die at an age. As far as cancer and cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality, is that resistance training itself, exercise, reduces that risk.
Yeah, and it's super interesting, and I think they were very bold because they didn't say it may reduce. They actually it said reduce, right? The risk of all-cause mortality. They didn't even say may. I was like, wow, this is very bold statement.
But again, that's because there's a relationship with that. But again, that doesn't examine mechanisms and why that happens. All it says is that if these populations that trained extra resistance trained roughly 60 minutes during that time period, they reduce the risk of death. But as you well know in life, there are other factors associated with that this paper does not even identify. It can't identify, genetic predisposition, dietary stuff, and all these other factors that have to be controlled for that play a role in these outcomes.
And I think that there is another parameter that I think is important is for the history of that each individual, for how long that guy is actually, or that person is actually practicing physical activity, continuously. Because someone that is doing physical activity the entire life is way healthier than someone that just started like 1 year ago.
Yep, and I actually have a slide I show my class. It's basically sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is a thing that came from Dr. Buford back in 2010. Anyways, this slide shows basically a decrease in muscle mass over time. And human beings, what happens to us, and what diseases infected at a greater rate. And actually, those that are lifelong resistance trainers stave off, slow the rate of muscle decline than any other population, even normal people. So, and those that are diabetic seem to fall muscle loss at a greater, faster rate. So, again, it's beautiful. And then you start saying, what is the relationship between lean body mass or skeletal muscle mass and mortality rate? There seems to be a nice little curve with that too, saying if you can retain lean body mass in your older adult life, you could live longer.
Yeah,
it's really kind of again, which aerobic exercise is not going to stimulate muscle mass gain compared to resistance training. So again, all roads are pointing and leading to resistance training.
I didn't see this on this paper, but have you read anything that also helps with like bone density and bone healthy overall, because you, as you get older, you tend to have more bone related injuries. Your bones start to
Mhm.
get a little weaker. So do you think that resistance training also help on that?
Of course, absolutely, and actually more so than a potentially aerobic exercise. Now, so I give you some personal experiences. Like we have a DEXA in our lab, and we can actually measure bone mineral density. And a lot of times we get males, especially resistance training males. You can see their BD pretty high. It's pretty good. Sometimes the resistance training be 2 times above, 1 to 2 times above the standard, or 1 to 2 standard deviations above the normal, which is really really good. And if you do that at a young age, and you can keep that through your 40s and 50s, when it starts to be a decline, the longer you hold on to that. Females, we're finding I can see a lot of their upper body have low BMD. Their legs are not bad, and aerobic exercise, there's a lot of compression from pounding, from the ground reaction force, is a nice little stress on bone density maintenance. But if, the reason I bring this up to you is resistance training itself. The compression action of stress on the bone actually facilitates and stimulates bone mineral retention and absorption. So therefore maintaining bone mineral density over time. So therefore reducing the potential risks of fractures and issues. So again, another beneficial aspect as far as resistance training.
Wow, this is amazing. It's unbelievable that we are in 2022 and people still don't realize that this is so important, you know.
It's hard though, and I think, as you know, it may be easier for you and myself and other people that have been ingrained with it for long periods of time. But if you just because you see or hear or read a benefit doesn't necessarily motivate people to actually want to do it. So the cosmetic thing is easy. Cosmetic's the easy thing to sell. It really is.
Yeah.
These other products are kind of like you don't see them, and you'd have to go to a doctor's office or something in order to get that outcome or measure. So, it's difficult. It's difficult. On top of that, you have to be sore. You have to hurt.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, at some point we need to have this going mainstream, just like running went mainstream with Dr. Cooper, right? Everyone
Mhm.
started running, and now Dr. Cooper became like synonym to
Yeah,
running.
yeah, yeah. And you're exactly right. But running easily translates to Gen Pop. It really does. It translates to general population. It's harder to generalize resistance training because look what it was associated with for how many years prior. You see very large mammal human males with a lot of muscle tissue that doesn't translate necessarily easy over to Gen Pop going, ooh, I want to look like that, or I want to be like that.
Hmm.
So that becomes difficult. So, but there are, different things where people are starting to train again. You can see if you compare our movie stars, our action movie stars, other than The Rock, now compared to what it was in the 80s and
Yeah.
90s, it's a much different look right now, is it
Yes.
not?
Yes.
And so with that's a little bit more mainstream. Even Thor in his last movie was, I don't know, not that impressive to a certain standard, while other people thought differently. But it's more mainstream, is it not? And so maybe those kind of things can help with that. It's just when you have, Arnold Schwarzenegger or, these very large human beings playing these roles, it just doesn't seem able to get to that level. And I don't know. There's a lot of factors go to play.
Now, the resistance training, this is something that also I'm not sure if they took in consideration the level of intensity. Because when you define resistance training, you basically said any type of exercise that you are employing the muscles and you're doing some sort of strength exercise. So the question is, does this, for example, include bands exercise, if I'm or just dumbbells, or
I couldn't answer that question unless you go back to these papers in which they attribute the data from. So I'm not sure what actual resistance training modality they
But
use.
when you
But
define, when you as a professor,
yes,
you define resistance training, do you have a particular level of intensity that you feel like is like the minimal baseline to be considered resistance? For example, if someone gets a 5 pounds dumbbell and do 10 reps, is that the resistance
hmm
training?
so I see what you're saying. And so what is there's the laboratory, the accurate form, or the more accurate ways to identify or quantify intensity, and then there's the subjective, how do you feel intensity. Does that make
Yes.
sense? So if you want to accurately measure intensity, generally speaking, is what they do is the easiest reference, and people argue with this, and it's fine. Is if your bench press is 300 pounds, your one rep max is 300 pounds, right? And you are going to train at 50% of that. That means 150 would be the prescribed amount of weight you would use, which is 50% of your 1 RM, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So unless their dumbbell, max is that, then of 10 pounds or whatever the weight you said, then it's probably a very minimal weight. However, I do want to let you know that there's some real cool work coming out that are looking at Dr. Stu Phillips and a lot of Dr. Lemecki. A lot of people are looking at blood flow restriction training, but also lesser weight, higher volume kind of training. So we're talking like 30-40% of 1 RM, lower weight. There seems to be some benefit as far as the stimulus is very similar.
You're talking about
Meaning,
high reps?
so kind of how do I say this? It's lower weight, higher volume exercise may stimulate muscle growth to similar outcomes as the heavier, traditional, heavyweight, low volume kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The side effect is that the strength is not going to be the same as you work with the heavier components, but the muscle gain or muscle size seems to increase, which is actually kind of interesting because it's starting to kind of, break that ivory tower that you have to lift heavy to get big. Does that make
But you
sense?
always said that when you were training. You always defend that position that you don't need to
Mm-hmm.
go crazy on the weights to grow. I remember you
And
saying that.
oh yeah, and it's again the data shows that and preserves that. And again, but then I have the days where I want to move some weight and I have the ego thing, It's like I want to try to move something. So, but then again, what you say crazy for one person is a warm up for another. So it's always relative. It's always
Yeah.
relative, right? So some people are warming up with your max. So it's completely relative. So again, heavyweight is a generic term.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the stimulus is the stress, right?
Yes.
The stress. And the stress is imposed by a lot of times the most direct factor to increase muscle growth is volume. It's not necessarily the 6,000 pounds doing for one rep. It's the volume, the amount of work being done to a certain extent, the stress being placed upon the muscle that it stimulates some of the factors that involve muscle growth. And it's really cool how the muscle adapts. And again, but you train to what your outcomes are. If you're trying to be a power lifter, that would make no sense to train with lots of volume, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the person's trying to become stronger. If you're training to gain muscle, you don't have to. So there's some really cool stuff with this. Again, more work's coming out, but again, there's this really cool kind of counter thought process, which goes against the old school make it heavy and lift kind of thing, where it's like, well, maybe you don't have to make it as heavy as possible. Maybe that doesn't have to be that.
Do you know when this study is going to come out? This year, next year?
No, there's lots of these studies that are currently out, and you can do, blood flow restriction training and some other things are going to continually coming out. Now, there's also caveats with all these too. So the general population, people always want the answer, the aha moment, like, there, it's finalized. It's never
It's
finalized.
never finalized. Yeah.
No, it just adds something to it, but there's also limitations to it. This might be in a population that's untrained, and so you go, wait a minute. If they're untrained, how would this work in a trained group? Oh, great question. Maybe that needs to be examined. So there's some limitations with those sometimes where people want to draw conclusions and make it absolute thing. And I know, because people are sick of coffee's good, coffee's bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad. People get sick of the back and forth. But it's just overall, it really comes down to, what is your goal? What do you want to accomplish? And then, adapting to that. But also how do you adapt?
Mm-hmm. But it's
not that.
it's the tough scenario of being a professor and going through the PhD, because I'm doing my PhD now in cybersecurity, and I keep remembering your days when you were doing yours, and everything that I ask you, you were like, well, it depends. I'm like, okay, now I understand, because I'm doing mine,
Yeah.
because it depends is usually the answer.
And again, and that's what I tell my class. And every time a student says, "Well, it depends," I'm like, "Nice, good job," because it really is conditional. And unfortunately, it's very frustrating as humans, because humans, we want black and white.
Yeah.
We want simplicity. We want it to be easy to understand. unfortunately, nature doesn't care what we think and what we want. It's going to do what it does. We have to kind of understand there's a lot of factors that go into play with this, and we're impatient. So, but I guess I appreciate it. I'm thankful that you are going. Congratulations on that process. I know it's a lot of work, and you never really know the amount of work and headache and stress and suffering until you actually do it.
Yeah,
But
it's hard.
the good thing about it, you are, being a bodybuilder and suffering through all those years of that work, and then now you can kind of go, wait a minute, I know how to suffer. This is not that bad. So
It's a different type.
it's unique.
It's a different type of suffering, to that for sure.
Yes.
And because there's a lot of frustration too. Mainly when your chair, instead of helping you, send a bunch of questions to you back, and like, oh God, I
Yep.
just want to answer this. And he challenged you with more questions. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, and that's actually probably a good mentor too, because they're really challenging. What did you think about this? How about this?
Yeah.
Ah, and these are good. I mean, they're frustrating, but in the end, they make you a better, much better student, and also a student moving forward, because you're always going to be a student. People are going to challenge you.
Yeah,
And that's a
I
good
think
thing.
that's because we always had these kind of understanding. Oh, if you want to bulk, you do low reps. If you want to cut, you do hard right. I mean, this is something that comes over the years and years. And now you're saying that there will be new studies that you're saying something that I heard, from you years ago.
Yeah.
And now it come the conclusion that yeah, that's actually now we can prove that.
Yep, there's a lot of good work out there. And sometimes as Gen Pop, they don't get to it. They don't always get to that work. Go, wait a minute. We talked about this, how many years ago, but it was out how many years ago? It just doesn't become out into the world for people to see and read, because again, a lot of times science is locked away behind these paid sites, and they can't get to it, and they can't understand. And on top of that, science is not easy to read. I mean, it takes time. It takes a work. It takes some, a level of understanding. And there's a lot of jargon, a lot of stuff, a lot of caveats. And sometimes it's nice to have someone and even now, even when you get to a certain level, you still need help going, what does that mean? What is that perspective? I don't get
Yeah.
that. But it's wonderful that again people are, and I appreciate a lot of meatheads are actually getting involved in science too. It's wonderful that more and more people are going, you know what, this is cool stuff. This is cool. It's like it's okay to be a nerd and a meathead at the same time.
Yeah, I like a lot of the work that Dr. Lane does, debunking a lot of myths. He does that
Yep.
very well, and he always bring a
Yep.
lot of papers to back him up. So it's pretty good.
Yep. Yeah, that's he likes the polar. I'm hiding now. I went to retirement with that too. I am no longer fighting the internet battles. I don't have time for that. He loves that stuff. Some people, I can't do that.
Well,
No more time
that's
for
how
that.
he makes a lot of money too. So that's
Yes.
another venue for him to debunk
Yep.
and sell his products and his app. He has a new app now that's pretty cool too. So I think
Yep. I saw that.
yeah. So I think it's good. It's good that people are getting more into this, as you said. People are getting a little bit more educated because in the past, probably most people only read Muslim Fitness magazine to get their studies, and we know
Yep.
that many of those studies they also have financial incentive that
Sure.
someone wants to create a new supplement or something. So there is always that.
Yep. And it's good. But I also think that some of my growth as since I was there is that I used to be a really hardcore, like kind of data explains everything. Data is everything. It's not data, then it doesn't matter. And I've actually, over time, I've started to learn to appreciate, anecdotal experiences, but also things that are happening in nature. So if a bodybuilder says A, B, and C, opposed to saying that they're an idiot, they're dumb, and you start going, huh, I wonder if some other factor could maybe explain that. Maybe we're just not measuring this correctly. And that's what's cool. There's some really Dr. Mike Roberts in Auburn University. He's actually he's a brilliant scientist, but he started actually taking some things and answering some more bro questions that actually may have some traction. And I look back and go, wow, we actually. And if you remember back how long ago when people would talk about sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, basically water content in muscle would increase, and therefore muscle size would increase, but not muscle protein content. So that's why powerlifters are stronger and people would make those statements, and that kind of died for a while. But then he single-handedly brought it back with some of the studies showing that fluid content and higher volume training in muscles seem to increase. And and maybe through some enzymatic activity in basic relation to the training style, it's going, wait a minute, there's maybe something here.
Yeah.
So my growth has been opposed to, muting people, some of the bro talk or and sometimes it's just an honest say, hey, I did this and this and this and this, I had this experience. You start going, wait a minute, I wonder if there's something to that, if you understand more of that
So
observation
you're saying
and
is
can
you are
translate.
more open mind for that.
Yeah, my growth has actually, because I don't, science is beautiful. It's a wonderful tool, but it has its limitations too. But I think when we start learning to see things in nature and observe them, and if we can try to use science to apply it, we actually might find out some of the things we say, well, that's completely bro, may actually have some merit. And I'm actually doing that research now with range of motion. I think when I was training with you guys back at the gyms, I would never use full range of motion
Yes, I
on most of my
remember that. Yep,
exercises,
yep.
right? And I went on a big proponent with that. And so I actually started, wrote some papers on this and did some different things. And now it's starting to create some kind of questions where people are going, wait a minute, let's do this. And where did the whole full range of motion come from? And who decided that? Who decided that 90-degree knee flexion is parallel for squats? And why is that the reference point, right?
Hmm.
So you start asking these questions and you can't find a reference. And so is this just based on belief systems and what people think? And so there's some, again, but that all started with bro stuff. All started going, hey, this is the way I trained, or I see other people train. I enjoyed it. Is it better? I don't know, but maybe we should start exploring it. So, but that's been part of my growth is, instead of, closing things down, going, maybe there's something to it opposed to just saying it's just, but it comes across because I'm not looking to make money off range of motion. Now, if I said something, made a claim and said, now give me $500, then I hope people would just tear me apart. But that's a different story.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool, Dan. Man, before we close, I just want to get an update from you. Besides teaching, are you involved in any research project right now, or right now you are just full time teaching and that's what you do?
No, well, teaching is just part of what we do as professors. I'm not sure if that's the realm you're going to go into yourself, but academia is it's an area, sometimes a very stressful area. But I teach full time at TAMU. I have graduate courses and undergrad courses. I also have a multitude of different studies going on. One study I had a master's student doing that range of motion where he's picking up. We're looking at a bench press or incline and flat press. We're looking at basically regional differences of blood flow post-exercise of the pec major. So just seeing if, there's a term called non-uniform hypertrophy where muscle seems to grow more so in certain areas and less so in other areas in the same muscle group. The question is, well, why is it doing that? And so we're looking at some blood flow content to see if there's any regional differences. We're looking at that's one study, pretty low level. And I just actually got past, this has taken quite a long time. If you remember my mentor and good friend, colleague, Dr. Darren Willoughby, who was at Baylor University, he had a muscle biopsy protocol that, I was trying to learn it from him when I was there, and I finally got his protocol passed at the university. So I'm actually looking at just comparing simple pain measures. So basically doing a machine, basically muscle damage soreness, how your leg feels after a leg day, you're like, oh
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
this
yeah.
is going to be a bad day, right? I'm comparing that versus the pain of a biopsy. So because people are very aversion, going, oh no muscle out of my leg, no way. But then they'll go do a leg exercise and can barely walk. And so I wanted to do this kind of cross examination, saying, hey, is this pain similar, different, or because when I got the biopsy done, I was like, this is simple. This is dumb.
Hmm.
It's sore, but it's nothing like a leg day where you're just like, oh my goodness, stairs are just murder,
Yeah,
So, but those are the research things going on there. But other than that, like I said, just running around with my head cut off, getting nothing done in academia is what we normally do. But just can publishing some papers, got some other projects, just pushing. So on that, like I said, that I just go and train, hide away where I can. I'm just getting busy, very, very busy. I miss you guys up there. I really want to get to Hidden Gym really, really bad. I can't tell you how bad I want to get up
yeah.
there.
We hope you can visit us. I don't think you ever been there after it
No,
was completely rebuilt, a lot of new machines and everything. Some
no.
machines that you definitely gonna love it. Though that pendulum machine for legs is a killer
Oh
machine.
yeah,
Yeah, very good. It
you're making me
isolates
jealous.
everything, man. That machine is tough.
We just don't have a population down here for that. We were near, if I was near Houston, maybe in San Antonio, but down here in Corpus Christi. We just do not have currently. Now that might change in the next 5-10 years.
I think it's actually getting better, isn't it? Because the NPC has a show there, a local show in Corpus Christi.
They did, but after COVID basically killed it and closed it off, and they moved it to, I think, to Austin or something.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just, and that did help. That helped the fitness industry. And we actually did a study here with 2 female bikini. I had a master's and I really wanted to extend that. I actually had a really cool study going on with that, and I really want to continue. We just don't have a lot of competitors in Corpus Christi, just not a lot of them. And if there was a larger number of people we could get, I could open that study back up again and, I did composition analysis. I followed them. We did a hydration status measure. I actually even measured their hydration status going into a show.
Wow.
They took their pee cup. Yeah, they took their cups with them to the show, and they peed in them. They saved them in the freezer, brought them back to us. They were awesome. They were, and that's never been done before in our industry. So I took blood samples, measured estrogen and T3 and all the hormones in response and composition. It was a really cool study and all observational, but I would love to do that in more people. I just don't have the population down here to do it. And a lot of people don't want to jump on either. If I was in Dallas, you'd have a line of people going, "Ooh, I want to do it."
Yeah.
But here, they just don't want to. They don't want to take the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I hope that NPC is listening to this show and can bring it back.
I hope so.
The NPC Corpus Christi for sure.
Well, tell Greg to bring a gym down here. You guys can come down here and bring that down. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, see, Greg.
I won't tell you no.
We need a hidden gym Corpus Christi.
Yes, sir.
All right, my friend. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate. Thank you for educating the community the way that you do with data. Unbiased as much as you can. We all have bias, but I know that you always try to be unbiased.
I try to be, even though we're all human beings.
Yeah, but thank you very much for your work.
Awesome, man. Well, if anything, let me know. Another podcast, I appreciate it because I miss you guys, and I'd love to see you guys in the near future.
Absolutely, I'll miss you too. All right, my friends, this is the end of the Unleash podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Subscribe and stay tuned for more.